Welcome to Tell Me a Story. My name's Adina Samuels, and I'm inviting anyone and everyone to share their stories with me. Let's see what we get. Jack Denton, welcome to Tell Me a Story. Thanks so much for joining me.
Yeah, I'm stoked to be here to tell you a story.
Well, Jack, before we get started, please introduce yourself to our listeners.
Sure. So I am a journalist. I live in Nairobi, Kenya. I cover East Africa sort of broadly. I work for both regional media through a Government of Canada funded fellowship program, but I also freelance for outlets including the Times of London and the Sunday Times and some other media outlets as well.
How cool is it to be able to say that you're a journalist in East Africa? Like, did you anticipate that ever being your life?
Well, I hoped it would be. It's kind of like there are some pinch me moments, and I think my story includes some of them. But, I still feel like I'm kind of figuring out as I go along, but I have got myself into some positions and interviewing some people where I'm like, wow, I didn't really think, I'd get here. So, I feel very lucky.
Amazing. Okay, well, let's jump in, Jack. You know the drill. Tell me a story.
Great. So I am going to tell you a story about probably one of the craziest sporting events in the world. And
Okay.
This was the subject of a feature story I wrote for the Sunday Times. But that was the, abridged 1,000-word newspaper feature. I'm going to give you the unpolished POV account. We've got bribery, violence, twerking women in buses.
As there always is at sporting events.
So I got pitched by a contact to cover the Rwenzori Marathon, which was in 2024 in its, I believe, third edition. And the Rwenzori Marathon takes place in probably one of the most unlikely places you can think of for a road race. And that is the Rwenzori Mountains of Uganda in Kasese district. This is a district that sits far to the west of Uganda, which is a landlocked country in East Africa, on the border with Democratic Republic of Congo. And Kasese is one of the most dangerous parts of Uganda.
What makes it dangerous?
Over the last 30 years, it has been the site of some of the worst cross-border violence that has spilled over from the DRC, including attacks by terror and rebel groups. In 2023, I think it was over 40 school children were massacred in Kasese district by the ADF, which is a very nasty terrorist group allied to ISIS. And there's a whole plethora of other
Congo?
Coming out of DRC. It's a jungly, mountainous region with a porous border. So rebels come over the border and perpetrate violence and go back.
What do they want? What's their goal? Just to scare people, or do they want the land?
Uganda. Uganda is active in Eastern Congo. Right. Eastern Congo, right, is the subject of the worst conflict violence since the Second World War. There's been millions and millions of people that have died. I think 6 million in the last 30 years. Sort of fairly low volume, but constant violence over minerals, over land. And the government in Kinshasa, which is the capital of DRC, has very little ability to stop it. So the Ugandans operate militarily in Eastern DRC. And they've angered rebel groups. The ADF also has a particular bone to pick with the Ugandan government. They're like a Ugandan rebel group that operates from DRC. It's all very complicated.
Wow,
so
that's so interesting.
Yeah, there's a lot of violence. There's also a lot of disease. Kasese was the focal point for the Ebola outbreak in Uganda. When I was there last summer, I went out in August. It was ground zero for monkeypox, making its way out of DRC into the rest of Eastern Africa. Has been hit by HIV. It is a malaria hotspot. It's very poor. Massive landslides in the mountains from melting glaciers cause, destroy crops. They kill people. This is an area that has really suffered. And
this is the setting of this marathon.
Yeah, and it's like they're like, we're going to host a marathon. The first one had a few hundred runners from basically Uganda, and I think some crazy Kenyans came. But the edition that I went to cover, there was people from over 30 countries. There was thousands of runners. It's really got to the point where it's a bit of a phenomenon. I talked to one running influencer who was like, yeah, people run Paris and New York and London, and then they think like, what's next? They're like, oh, I'm going to go do this crazy thing. So I decided I was going to go and cover it. So
Hold on.
Yeah.
So a marathon is always, no matter where you are, it's 42.2 kilometers, I guess, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And this race is certified by World Athletics. It's like a real legit measured marathon. There's also a half marathon and like a 10K.
Right. And are people running through, like, what's the terrain? Is it also jungly, foresty kind of things?
The roads are now paved. They were not during the first edition. The course starts parallel to Queen Elizabeth National Park, which is a national park where there's wildlife. There's stationed protecting runners are armed guards, soldiers that are there to protect against like lions and elephants that can cross the road.
What?
Yeah, no, it's wild. And then as they go...
And then wait, so is Kasese, like, if this is Kasese, where's the border to the DRC? Like, just right there?
Oh, it's right there. I've ended up like a kilometer or 2 kilometers away from the Congo border in reporting this story.
Okay.
And the marathon gets probably 5K out, I would say. Yeah. So I'm like, okay, I'm going to go write about this. This is a crazy story. So I had to get myself to Kampala, which is a place I've been lucky to go a few times. And because I was kind of bootstrapping it, I decided to take the night bus from Nairobi to Kampala, which is about 18 hours. And it's overnight. And when I get to the Ugandan border, I'm like the only white person, the only Mzungu, they would say, for miles around. It's 3 a.m. I am vulnerable. And they deny my visa. They say you can't enter the country. And everyone else on my bus goes through. They're all waiting for me. They keep me waiting for almost an hour. And finally, the border guard comes out looking for some bakshish, And he literally says to me, what is it worth to you to get into Uganda? And it's the only time this has ever worked in my life. But I pulled out my press card and I was like, I am a journalist. Let me in. Because I had
this
scheduled.
Is so cinematic.
I know. I felt pretty badass because I had a meeting with the Minister of Tourism and later that day, the Minister of the Environment. And I said to him, I was like, look, I have a meeting with these government ministers. Like, I'm a real journalist. If you don't let me in, I'm going to call them and tell them that his name was Alfred. I was like, Alfred, I'm going to tell them that you won't let me into the country. And he disappears and he comes back and he's like, okay, we've issued your visa. I'm like, great.
But you had been into Uganda before with no issues. Like you had driven into the country? I'd
flown into Entebbe, which is a little less prone to corruption. But crossing a land border in the middle of the night, like you're asking to be extorted.
You were asking for it.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I make to Kampala, go straight to some press conference. The next couple of days, I interview various government ministers, the son-in-law of the president, which was pretty cool, all about this marathon. And then I have to go out there. And it's so far. It is like an 8-hour drive from Kampala on like horrendous roads. And so I got a lift with this busload of Ugandan runners. They picked me up. They picked myself and my contact, who's this British guy who was like running PR for the marathon. He was my connection off the side of the highway. And it's just
how did you even set that up with the Ugandan runners or the PR guy?
He handled it. The PR guy, know, the unsung heroes, all the logistics. Yeah. My travel agent.
Bring him out. Bring him on stage.
Yeah, Ben deserves major kudos for this, and was just in about just as much as danger as I was when it came down to it. So the bus like screeches to a halt. The doors open, and there's just like Afro house emanating from the doors. It's 10 a.m. Literally the doors open and beer bottles like roll out onto the side of the highway. And like we get in this bus, it's just full of these Ugandan runners. And immediately they offer me a beer. I accept, would be rude.
Yeah, you're not the one running a marathon. They shouldn't be drinking beers.
They give me there's African Guinness, which is like 6% or something. It's horrible. They give me one of those. And they sort of explain who they are and like why they're drinking. And they are part of this global movement called Hash House Harriers. You can find these groups in cities across the world. They describe themselves as a drinking club with a running problem. I think basically how it works is like they go running and then like they drink and maybe there's like a scavenger hunt element with drinking. I don't really know, but
Okay.
these people love to party.
But do they
Well,
look like fit? Like, do they look able to run a marathon?
some of them,
Okay.
some of them less so. But spoiler, some of them ran the full marathon like on a
I'm
couple
not
hours
even
sleep.
shocked. I'm
And
not even
like
shocked. Yeah.
I saw them drinking Tusker Lights, certainly like 4%. So like on the side of the marathon course, like these people are like insane.
Yeah.
So what is supposed to be like maybe a 6 hour drive is like 10. We blow a tire. We stop for beer, Adina, 6 times. We run out of beer and they're like, we got to stop. Buy more beer. We roll into Kasese like super late, like probably 10 or 11 at night. And the marathon's the next morning. So yeah. And then whenever I go to a hotel, next morning, it's time for the marathon. I get up with my guy Ben. We see the start of the race. It's all cool. And we decide, we need to get a better view of like what's going on. So we hire
You
a
joined
boda
the
boda.
marathon. Oh,
Sort of.
okay.
Sort of. I was only on a few hours sleep. I was also a little hungover. I was force fed beers on a bus
Beer
against my will.
after
And
beer
yeah,
after
by the
beer.
time we get to Kasese, like everyone's just hammered. Like there's literally women are like standing up like on the armrests between the aisles twerking. It's
Wait,
phenomenal.
women too? That's so interesting because during my
Yeah.
time in Ghana, I found that everything exciting only the men were doing the exciting things, like getting on buses and running in marathons. So
Now the women
I'm
were
happy
right
to hear
up
that.
there. The leader of this group was this woman who had a nickname called Nyege Nyege, which is a crazy music festival. But yeah, she was their fearless leader. So we're like, okay, how are we going to get a better view of the course? We're going to hire a boda boda. So these are motorcycle taxis that are ubiquitous across East Africa. They're like little, like Honda or Chinese built, like 100cc, 150cc little motorbikes. And the guys, you pay like $1 and they'll take you where you want to go. So the two of us hop on this boda boda.
What is the currency in Uganda? Sorry.
Ugandan shillings.
Okay.
Ugandan
That's
shillings.
hilarious.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's about 30,000 Ugandan shillings or something is about 10 Canadian dollars.
Okay.
Yeah. So we get this guy. We zip off up the race course and we're starting to get towards the Congo border. And that's when we start to realize the security situation, like how serious it is. I later find out there are 5 different security forces that are present in the district, including like paratroopers that are usually fighting like deep inside Congo. There's like the presidential like commandos, and like there's guys with balaclavas and like belt-fed machine guns and like rocket launchers. Like I don't really know, like I don't know what that was gonna do. If I don't think that the Congolese rebels have like armor, but these guys are
And
like
you're seeing this
strapped.
while you're in the water, like you're boating around, you're seeing these
No,
people
so boda boda is the name of the motorcycle taxi.
Oh, it's a motor. Oh, wait.
It's a motorcycle. We're on a motorcycle.
Oh, it's a motorcycle.
It's a motorcycle.
Okay, yeah.
It's like
Yeah,
a
I'm
little
with you.
motorcycle called a boda boda.
Okay.
So we're zipping up into the mountains on this boda boda by all these armed men, and then we reach the end of the marathon course, which is where people turn around. And our driver, who spoke very little English and had a very severe speech impediment, which made communication very limited. But he kind of says to us, like, we should keep going. We'll go higher up into the mountains. You'll get better pictures. You'll get a more of a view. Because these mountains are really, really high. It's like most of Africa's highest mountains is in this range, the Rwenzoris. Like the third highest peak after Mount Kilimanjaro and Mount Kenya is up here. Really big mountain. So we're like, okay, we continue. And we keep going. And I realize at some point that we're now on a dirt track heading directly towards the border with DRC.
Oh,
and I'm
God,
looking
oh,
at
God,
my
oh,
phone and
God.
I'm like, we're getting pretty close. We go through this like abandoned mining village. It was a copper mine that was closed down in like the 80s, I think. And we stop. And I got my camera. I'm like starting to take some photos. I wander off. It's all feeling a little eerie. There's a lot of locals that are like on the side of the road in the bush carrying panga machetes. and they're just like watching us, and it's pretty
Mm,
weird.
mm.
The concern is not like they're going to attack us, but the security concern would be like one of them calls someone, and then like some pickup truck zips over and kidnaps us or something.
Yeah,
So
casually.
yeah, so I'm like taking photos, and Ben starts yelling. He's like, "Jack, come on, we gotta go." So I run back to the motorcycle, and I'm like, "What's going on?" He's like, "We gotta go." So we hop on, we zip down the mountain, and I'm like, "Ben, man, what happened?" And he goes, "Okay, well, I was talking to our motorcycle taxi driver, and I asked him, I say, James, his name was James. James, are we safe here?" And apparently James said, "No. We are extremely unsafe here. We need to leave immediately."
What?
And it's like, bro, why did
Why
you
did you
bring us
take
here?
us here?
Yeah, like, so anyway, we were fine. Zip back down the mountain, see the end of the marathon, massive after party, partied with some Ugandan commandos, wrote up the story, happy days. Bus ride back was pretty uneventful compared to the shenanigans the
Wait,
first
wait, wait.
time.
So I'm assuming not everyone running this marathon was drunk and hungover at the same time. Like, were there proper
Oh yeah,
athletes
yeah. There
competing?
were some
Yeah.
elite athletes. There were people from all
Okay.
over the world, serious runners. I mean, like the course is really challenging because it's at high altitude, and then
Yeah.
also the elevation gain is pretty dramatic. So I think
Right.
the winning times were like not particularly fast, but still quick. I mean, people were running like I think like the winning time was probably like a 4:15 or something. And I think like the record is around 4 hours, maybe
Wow.
4:20. So like they were slower, but I mean there were some real like pro runners, mostly from East Africa.
Mm-hmm.
Um, yeah. So there's kind of a two-part to this story. Should I
Okay.
continue?
Yeah, but I'm not done. So,
Okay,
do you
please.
think if you were alone without Ben, the PR guy, like, would you have gone like the way that you describe it is so casual? No, you jump off the bike at an old mining ground and you're just snapping some photos, watching people walk around with machetes. Like,
Hmm.
that sounds
Yeah,
pretty
it was pretty weird.
scary.
I think my spidey senses were starting to tingle. I was
Yeah.
like, this feels a little weird. And then like 30 seconds later, he was like, yeah, we gotta go. So
Yeah. Yeah, yeah. I wonder, like, do you think you would have been quick to jump on the back of a motorcycle in an area you didn't know there on your own? Or was there something about like being with Ben that made you feel a
yeah, I
little
would have
more
done it.
comfortable?
Like, sorry, mom, but living in East Africa has kind of messed up my risk sensitivity meter. Like, this is not a super safe place, but it can be safe as long as you take precautions. And I think that I'm talking about like East Africa generally, like you can be robbed, but it's not unsafe if you just follow sort of like guiding wisdom. And it
Yeah.
seems maybe counterintuitive, but boda bodas are ubiquitous through East Africa. I mean, sure, they're like not super safe from like a road safety perspective, but like living here, you become used to like coming out of a restaurant and there's just some dude outside on a motorcycle and you're like, hey, Kaka, like just a word for brother, like, let's go. And you just
Yeah.
get on the back of this guy, random dude's motorcycle, and he takes you wherever you want to go.
It's
Um,
just Uber, basically.
you can order them on Uber. You can also just grab them off the street. So
Yeah.
they are not like, I mean, sure. I mean, if you came out of a bar super late at night and like there's a sketchy looking guy on a motorcycle, like don't get on the back. But by and large, like you can
Mhm.
just grab these guys anywhere. They're like kind of informally regulated. Like that would not be high up on my like safety list.
Yeah.
Female friends of like
But
women friends of mine take them on their own at night. Like
right.
so mhm.
And do you find the people, well, I guess you're living in Kenya now, not Uganda, right?
Yeah, I live in Nairobi in Kenya.
Okay. So, in general, do you find the people are like, are you trusting towards them? Do you have your guards up? Because like when I was traveling in Western Africa, like it seemed like everyone and their dog just wanted to help me all the time, you know? So created this
Yeah.
environment of trust. And some people would be like, Adina, no, like don't go with that person. But for me it felt so
Yeah, it's
obviously
funny.
fine.
I think it's one of those things like when I've had people who are visiting or who are traveling to the region, and they ask me for safety tips, like when you give people who've never really traveled, in East Africa or in Sub-Saharan Africa, or, even just like less comfortable, more off the beaten path destinations, you give them like very conservative guidance. So I would urge conservatism, but like when you have traveled around a bit, you get a feeling for what is and isn't safe. On the one hand, there's a lot of like scamming that goes on in my experience. So people are trying to like overcharge you, trying to like just kind of get a bit of money from you in one way or another. But also like people will help you. And sometimes they expect you to give them a little bit of money, but like that's okay. And sometimes they don't. And sometimes, a guy who sold you a Coca-Cola is like going to help you find which bus, you want to get on.
Yeah.
There is
Do they
like,
give you, have you ever, sorry, speaking about Coca-Colas, when you buy a Coke like at a convenience store, do they pour it into a plastic bag?
that's a West African thing. I know about
Okay.
that. No, they don't do that. They don't do that over here.
That was probably the biggest culture shock I ever
Yeah, and they
experienced.
have
So
like
that
watering
was the
bags
biggest.
too, I
Yeah,
think.
yeah,
Yeah, that's kind of
yeah,
wacky.
yeah.
Um,
Okay, part two, Jack, take it away.
Part two. Okay, part two. So weeks later, I'm sitting in my apartment and I get an email from this American film producer named Johnny Fountain. And he says, I read your article. I love the idea of this marathon. Let's try and develop it into a documentary or an unscripted TV show, like for Netflix or something. I'm like, dude, that sounds awesome. It is a crazy thing. Let's make it happen. So I don't want. I'll skip through. There's a lot of back and forth and logistics, but ultimately, he bankrolls me to go back to Kasese with a film
Mm.
crew to try and interview a bunch of people, because so that we put together what I think in the industry they call a sizzle reel. It's like a 5-minute thing that then like they try to sell to, a studio, a production company, whatever. So there I am. I'm going back to Kasese. This time I fly, so I don't have
Okay.
to threaten my way across the border.
With Ben, the
Um,
PR guy, or solo this time?
I was
Oh,
just
with the
solo. I was
film
solo
crew.
this time. I hire what we call in journalism like a fixer. So a local who, can get you contacts. We hire a fixer, videographer, driver. We head out, back out into the mountains. The driver's car is like a chopped, souped up hatchback, which is drastically ill suited for the Rwenzori Mountains. So anyway, we go back out to Kasese. I'm like, I never thought I would ever go there again. And now I think I'm going to spend a lot of time there.
Yeah.
But we do all these interviews, like we party with like the superintendent of police who like comes in and we get like really drunk with. Ugandans love to party. We're like doing shots with the superintendent of police. And find the kind of, we were looking for someone specifically though. We wanted to talk to a runner who had been a victim or a survivor of violence in the region, because when you put together one of these narratives, you want to, have a bit of drama, a bit of suspense. So we
Sure.
wanted a survivor of ADF violence. And we get a lead. One of the runners we interview, this guy Exile, he says, someone I used to work with as a porter, a mountain guide in the Rwenzoris, he was kidnapped by the ADF. He survived. And he's a runner. And we're like, okay, man, like, how do we meet him? And that's how I find myself in this car, right back in the abandoned mining town. We go back there. And I'm like, surely no. I'm like, how close are we to the Congo border here? And so I ask like our fixer videographer, who's one person, and the driver, I'm like, guys, are we safe here? And their response is like one of those hilarious ones. They go, Jack, you're safe with us.
Mm.
And I'm like, okay, so like not really. Okay.
No.
So we continue like kilometers past where we turned around. We're now like 2 clicks from Congo. The car can no longer make it. The roads are impassable. So we get out and we start hiking. We hike like an hour and a half, like literally like up into the like mountainous jungle of the Congo borderlands. And we meet this guy and he like
Oh
takes us
God.
up the mountains. He's got this little house like right on the hillside overlooking this
Mm.
valley. And whatever, we set up our kit and we interview him. And honestly, I think like the end of my story is really his story. He's a really, really remarkable guy. When he was 12 years old, the ADF stormed into his village. His mother and his sister managed to escape. They murdered his 2 older brothers in front of him. And because he was a child, they took him prisoner. And he spent the next 3 years in captivity with this like radical Islamist, like ISIS linked, alleged cannibal, like rebel group. I can't imagine anything worse. And he's basically like a camp slave, helping them cook, carry shit around. Like he told me, he saw people brutally murdered with guns, with machetes. Every day he thought he would die. And one night he hears gunshots really, really close. And he hides, he like digs a little hole and he hides. And he thinks, this is it. Like, we're gonna die. And there's all this shooting and explosions and stuff. And then he hears in Luganda, we're in Rwenzori, like a Ugandan language, like kids come out. And it's the Ugandan army. And he was rescued after 3 years of being a prisoner. And then he spent a few years in a refugee camp. And then he joined the Ugandan army. And if you think this guy's life can't get any crazier, he then fought Joseph Kony and the Lord's Resistance Army. Like, remember Kony 2012? Like, that guy in South Sudan, like, fights Kony, becomes like a highly trained, like, mountain commando or something, retires from the army, and now he's a very successful mountain guide in the Rwenzoris. He owns a house with some land that he rents to farmers, and he's doing really well. And he's an avid runner, and he runs the marathon. And, his story is sort of reflective of the story of Kasese, a region that has suffered so much, been through so much, but is coming out the other end of something. And just as this marathon has brought an influx of tourism to Kasese, has revitalized this region, running and outdoor activities is now the way this guy makes money. It's how he he obviously carries a lot of trauma with him. It's how he finds peace. He goes running. And that's the story of the Rwenzori Marathon and some of the people I met along the way.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's so fascinating that I like how you tied it all together, but like he's literally standing his ground. He went back to the place that
Yeah.
like he's living on the border with the people that took him captive for 3 years, and that's his home. He looks out onto those mountains, and how can he not do anything but remember those terrible days and nights? And then he runs through them.
Yeah, no, it's so remarkable. And I think it's like a testament to, a resilient spirit, what the feeling of home is and how maybe you're inexorably drawn home. Yeah, no, he's a really remarkable guy.
And what happened with the TV show?
It's in development. Yeah, we got all this footage. We're editing together some stuff, and they're going to pitch it to some studios, and hopefully August 2025 we'll be out in Kasese with a crew.
Really?
Yeah, hopefully.
So Jack, what is your plan? Like, are you settling down in East Africa?
In the short to medium term, yeah. When I got started in journalism, which was sort of really in university with a student paper, I kind of harbored this idea that I wanted to be a foreign correspondent. I gave it a shot living in Jerusalem, but then COVID happened and I kind of shut down that whole scheme. And then I really started my journalism career in London, covering like global finance and economics. And I got to travel and it was super cool. But the idea of being a foreign correspondent never really left me. And then I was really lucky that the magazine I worked for in London sent me on assignment to East Africa, to a different section of the Uganda-Congo border, to write about this pipeline project. And I went to Uganda, like rode on the back of a motorcycle, was around all these guys with guns, and I was like, oh, this is cool. I really want to learn more about this place. I really want to spend some time here. So I found a way to kind of move out here. So I see this as, maybe like a multi-year sort of thing of, I want to get more experience reporting in East Africa, tell some more stories, for my own personal experience, and also sort of, it seems like a good chapter to have as in terms of professional experience as a journalist. But so far, so good.
What are the comforts you miss most from home?
Actually, Nairobi is such a livable city. Kenya is like pretty much a middle income country, whereas Uganda next door is really quite poor, like for comparison. Nairobi has a really thriving Kenyan middle class. So there's a lot of really nice like bars and restaurants and, extracurricular activities and sports and hobbies that like lots of foreigners or expats do and lots of Kenyans do as well. So there's a lot to do. A lot of really interesting people live here. Great live music scene. So I don't miss a ton of comforts, but I do miss Mexican food. Can't get Mexican food here.
That's so funny that you say that, because when I was traveling also, like, I had everything, whatever, like the cold showers were kind of annoying. The one thing that I longed for the most was bubble tea. I couldn't find it anywhere.
Nairobi is developed enough. You can get boba in Nairobi.
No.
Yeah, the burritos, not so good. So you get a good burger. I think I'm a food guy, so that's usually what I miss is like some type of food. And the one genre of food cuisine I miss is Mexican, because it's so yummy. And sorry, Nairobi, but your Mexican food is just terrible.
Just not cutting it.
No.
Well, Jack, thank you so much for sharing this story with me today. It feels so exciting. It's making me want to jump on a plane right now and come visit you.
Yeah, come out here.
I also love like sharing. Well, I mean, I'm curious. So I guess my last question is, before I went traveling in Africa, a lot of people said to me like, Adina, why would you do that? It's so dangerous. And I didn't know if it was going to be dangerous or not. And in the end, there were like some scary moments, but overall, I wouldn't call it a dangerous experience, not even close. Mm-hmm. But when you come home and you tell people the stories, it's always the ones that have the most drama, excitement, adventure, that kind of thing. How do you balance, I guess, giving an accurate portrayal of what it is like living in East Africa when people are kind of expecting the glitz and glam of the running for your life kind of thing?
I mean, I'm acutely aware of this as like a journalist, right? Because you always want to have what we call balance, in your stories. And especially as like a white dude reporting in Africa, I'm very aware, about the negativity of a lot of stereotypes about sub-Saharan Africa. So you don't want to perpetuate negative stereotypes, because this is objectively a less safe place than like Canada, but it's not like terribly dangerous. There are some very like hard safety precautions you have to take, specific ones. Every apartment building has like a guard and like walls around it. You can't really walk around at night. Beyond that, like, you're not going to get robbed in the street in broad daylight. It's very unlikely that you will be, at least in East Africa, I think, it's very unlikely you'll be the victim of like a really violent crime in a city, because when a foreigner is killed, like it's really bad. So it's not, the terribly dangerous place that like maybe some people think it is, but there are like some specific safety precautions you have to take. But then, and even like when I tell this story and, where I've had a couple sketchy experiences, when I step back, like they were sketchy, but I haven't really felt like my life is like in imminent danger. It's a little spooky, right? Being like on the border with Congo in an area that's very violent, and like strange men with machetes are looking at you. But like odds on, nothing was going to happen to me. So you kind of trot it out as a story, but like it is important to note that it's not like carnage everywhere. And especially as a foreigner, you have a lot of privilege in like maybe you'll get robbed, but I think the likelihood of being a victim of a violent crime is lower.
Well, Jack, really appreciate you sharing this with me. I'd love to
Of
keep
course.
you on and hear a whole lot more stories. Hopefully, we can have you back. And best of luck with everything.
Sure. Thank you, Adina.
Thanks for listening to Tell Me a Story. If you like what you heard, like, subscribe, follow. You know the drill.